Good afternoon. My name is John Kagia, and I'm the Chief Knowledge Officer with New Frontier Data. And we couldn't be more excited to have you here for our next conversation about cannabis-infused products as part of our broader partnership and collaboration with SōRSE technology. If you've been following this series, it's been a really kind of comprehensive exploration and examination of the ins and outs of the cannabis-infused product landscape. And part of the reason why this topic is of so much interest to so many stakeholders within the industry is because of how quickly the product landscape is evolving, as both technology and evolving consumer preferences have led to this surge of interest in new product forms, as well as new delivery mechanisms, new ways to ingest cannabis and cannabinoid-infused products. We have seen just over the last decade, the share of flower in most markets fall from over 90% to less than 50% as infused products across the spectrum, both edibles, beverages, topicals, tinctures, etc., have really gained traction, and consumers are finding really compelling ways, new use cases to integrate these products into their lives. And given the scale of this opportunity, and given the number of new markets that are being activated right now, we couldn't be more excited to have had SōRSE as a partner, given the depth of expertise that they have in infusing products, and given the market-leading work that they have been doing in helping innovative companies bring new and novel products to market. So today in our second webcast, we're going to be drilling in specifically into how to scale products effectively. In our last webcast, we talked broadly about what emulsification is and some of the fundamentals around product infusion. And building on that, we now want to look at how do you get from concept to store shelves and then grow and expand your product from there. Our partner and guide for this conversation is Tyler Peterson, who's Chief Operating Officer of SōRSE Technology. And we couldn't be more delighted to have you here, Tyler. Welcome.
Thank you.
So a quick run through our agenda. I'll introduce myself, Tyler will introduce himself and introduce SōRSE, though I hope by this point you're all very familiar with SōRSE. And then we'll explore some of the real themes around scaling products effectively in this market, including identifying the best production processes for this vision that you have for your product, how to evaluate suppliers and make sure that the folks you've picked are going to be best aligned for your vision for implementation, how to ensure that the products that you manufacture are clearly consistent and really replicable so that your customers know that what they're going to be getting in the can, in the bottle, in the thing that they are eating is going to be dose consistent every single time. We're going to talk about how to build a multi-state strategy, given the number of new markets that are being activated and the scale of opportunity even within the existing markets. And we're going to talk about navigating regulations, particularly at this moment when there's a robust discussion happening around potential federal legalization, really thinking about both how the differences in state regulations impact this market opportunity, and then two, how federal regulation might change the industry landscape. So as grounding for this conversation, if you've not read the two reports that we've co-produced with SōRSE, we urge you to go to newfrontierdata.com/reports, and there you can both find both of these reports as well as every other report that New Frontier has produced. But these two reports, I think, provide a wonderful anchoring for our conversation. Second, just a bit of housekeeping. This is a webcast, but we encourage you to submit your questions. The questions that you have been sending us, which we have already received nearly 24 of, and we're really excited to hear more from you, are how we shape the conversations that we have during these webinars and these webcasts. So even though this is a recording, please submit your questions and we will review all of them and we will get back to you through the Q&A interface that is in your participant screen interface. So without further ado, just by way of introduction, for those of you who might not know me, my name is John Kagia. I am the Chief Knowledge Officer with New Frontier Data, and New Frontier Data is a research data and analytics firm focused exclusively on the cannabis industry. You know, we think a lot about how the evolution of this industry is going to both create opportunity, challenges, risk, and that is really the foundation of our work, because for the investors, business owners, regulators, policymakers, and other stakeholders who we work with, it's really critical to understand how this is one of the fastest evolving markets in our economy is going to evolve. And when we talk about the speed of this industry's growth and how dynamic its evolution has been, I really don't think that, as somebody who's been studying this intensely now for nearly a decade, that there's a category that better encapsulates the evolution of this industry than the infused product sector. We've come a very, very long way from the homemade brownies people were selling by their point of sale, cash registers in dispensaries a handful of years ago. And whether it is infused beverages, which is a really exciting category given some of the innovation that's happening there, to the infused pet food that we're now seeing hit in the market and taking off with phenomenal interest from pet owners and the veterinary community. We think that this is one of the categories that is both going to introduce both consumers and non-consumers to foundationally new experiences. But we also think these categories are going to be critical in the normalization and socialization of cannabis in both American and global society. So it's that perspective that we bring to this conversation, and really excited for the themes we're going to be exploring today. And with that, I'm delighted to introduce Tyler Peterson, Chief Operating Officer at SōRSE Technology, who've been our incredible partner through this. Tyler, welcome. Please introduce yourself and SōRSE to our audience.
Great, thank you, John. Yeah, pleasure to be here. Let me start off with saying the cannabis industry is a fun, wild ride. I've been a part of SōRSE Technology since the beginning, and my background of not necessarily a THC or CBD background like some people bring to the table. My background is more in operations, both in startups in the technology industry, as well as in the material handling systems and designing warehouses. I've been in facilities that range everything from making frozen pancakes to big rig trucks, and using all that experience on not only project managing, facilities management, startup management, has really dovetailed nicely into the chaos that is the cannabis world. So it's been fun. We've reached all over the globe with our emulsions, all over the country for sure, and continue to grow. And SōRSE, for those of you that may have not caught some of the previous webcasts, we're an emulsion company. We take primarily THC and CBD products, distillate, isolate, and convert it into something that can be easily diffused in a liquid, edible, topical, anything like that. And really, we've taken it a step above what anybody else has done, bringing in top scientists, food scientists, from the engineering background, everything to create the best possible product we can make. So with that, we've worked with multiple partners to help them launch successful brands, both in the THC and CBD business. I've set up multiple processing facilities myself in multiple states, and we've made mistakes along the way. We've had plenty of success along the way, and if I can share that experience with you guys and help you understand SōRSE better and how to be successful, that's what I'm here for.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Tyler. And maybe a question which actually, this one is off script, but as you were talking, it reminded me that I have been curious. You were one of the early kind of stakeholders at SōRSE. Mm-hmm. Just in that time, what would you say are some of the biggest changes you've seen in the market? You have a long view, given how long you've been doing this.
So we started in Washington State here, which by most accounts is a more mature market especially if we're talking THC world. But even jumping into that 5 years ago, it had still been semi-established. And to watch the evolution in Washington state, as well as the other states, with regulations, with learning, with hiccups along the way. And I'm sure most of the people watching or listening are fully aware, and they can say, oh yeah, I'm in Illinois, and I can tell you the hiccups we've had with getting licenses and things like that. And, you know, each state is a little unique and different with what they do, but it's just watching the industry in general grow, watching the states understand, using us as a resource to say, hey, what do you mean a drink? Does it need to be refrigerated? Does it not need to be refrigerated? Some of the questions are simple. Some of them are really complicated. So there's the kind of the regulation side of it. And then simply the development of the market itself, how it's grown from being very small to continuing to be growing. And really, if you look at the beverage industry in particular as more on par with what alcohol is, you know, I see a future where you're going to be at a party and somebody's going to be drinking a beverage and they'll go, oh, and it's going to sound cooler than this, but is that alcohol or is that THC? Oh, it's THC. Yeah, I got 3 milligrams I'm drinking here. Great. What product is it? You know, in the same way that you talk about alcohol in a social setting now, for sure.
You know, people keep asking why I've been so fixated on the potential opportunity that beverages present. And I think that's precisely it. The substitutability of beverages with alcohol in social settings, the fact that you're still drinking and so you can blend in a little more seamlessly, I think is part of the reason why adoption has been what it is and why it presents so much opportunity. And for younger adults, you're already starting to see this starting to emerge in the data. The substitutability, the idea that cannabis doesn't give you the hangover, doesn't have some of the health effects that are now so well documented on the alcohol side, I think presents phenomenal opportunity as younger adults are coming of age in a society where alcohol is increasingly seen, or cannabis is seen as safe as, if not more safe than alcohol. I think it's a phenomenal social change we're seeing right now.
Well, I think you're exactly right. And a big part of that comes down to education. You know, you mentioned that even edibles from brownies have evolved over the last however many years. But, you know, I always say that we still have a bit of a stigma when it comes to edibles, and drinks not quite as much, because people weren't mixing up drinks in their college bathtub, but they were making brownies. And when I asked somebody, how many milligrams that brownie that screwed you up for 3 days in college have? I don't know. Well, yeah, that's because it's a whole different world now, significantly more regulated. Dosing is much more appropriate, and we still have a bit to overcome when people say, I don't do edibles. Well, then you haven't done our edibles, because it can change your life. Yep.
Precisely. So let's get into this conversation about how to scale cannabis-infused products effectively. And our entire discussion is going to revolve around the 7 themes that are up on screen, from initially building a product strategy and we'll close with an outlook for the future. But I'll leave this up just so that folks can follow along as we're going through this. But this is going to be an expansive and really wide-ranging conversation. And maybe just to take a step back, because I think for so long we've been talking about infused products, but to your point, Tyler, given that these are not your college brownies anymore, I think people may not really understand some of the technologies or processes that go into actually manufacturing an infused product. Mm-hmm. So could you give us a kind of a peek behind the curtain on the factory floor? Like, what does the manufacturing product process actually look like?
Yeah, and there's several different ways to do it. One of the big things that we really try to enforce at SōRSE Technology with our partners is treat this as a food product. Treat it not necessarily like you would in the cannabis industry, as in making cartridges or making pre-rolls. This is a different animal. And so for a lot of people to say, hey, you know, we're going to get into beverages, we've done a lot of flour, a bunch of other things, you know, we can put in a beverage line that's great. And a lot of people can, but without the proper QA and checking on things, I mean, you're to the point where you're serving something that people are ingesting, and you can kill somebody. And without the proper steps, it can turn out really bad. So I think a lot of the regulations that are out there now are far below what people should really be doing if you talk about GMP and things like that. And I know we'll touch on that later. So really look at the current food industry as a standard and build off of that. Volumes for cannabis beverages are still relatively low compared to what the beer industry does or what the soda industry does. So you have to take that into account, that everything you're doing with regards to packaging, ingredients, you might think you're the hottest thing out there, but that flavor company is going to go, really? You're only ordering 20 pounds of this stuff? We just sold, 2,000 pounds of it to somebody else. So remember that you're small fry. Your cost is going to be a little bit more because your volumes aren't going to be super high. And then look at how you're going to produce. Are you working with a co-man who has an existing facility? What is their QA program set up? What's their recall setup? How do they operate? Do you have your own license? Are you going to set up a small bottling facility yourself? Is it in a food style room that is managed and governed by Department of Agriculture, or whatever the state regulating governing body is? And there are multiple ways to do it. I mean, honestly, you can have something as small as, a 50-gallon beautiful stainless tank. Have that product. If you're not doing carbonated, run it through a very simple filler. Make sure you're sanitizing, cleaning all your bottles. The product can either be dosed in the tank or you can microdose it afterwards. Some of that is state regulations and how they do testing. And caps sealed. Make sure you're following the proper child resistant regulations. Your label, of course, needs to be put on, whether it's a sticker or a heat shrink or some combination of the two, and then boxed up and out the door. So you can do it on various scales. We've worked with partners that have launched in a lot of other states where that's exactly what they want to do. They know it's going to be a relatively slow start because beverages aren't as big. They want to get in early. They use a co-man, so they're not investing in a license. They're kind of going a light and fast alpine style. That's a climbing reference, sorry. Alpine style introduction so that they can make more if they need to by throwing more bodies at it. And then from there, ramp up your production. So you go from maybe a $50,000 system to maybe a $250,000 system. And then at one point, maybe up to $1 million system when volume allows it.
So just talking about that, there's obviously a lot of moving pieces here, and you've touched on quite a lot of them quite quickly. But assuming, say, somebody has an idea, they're working with a partner to do it, so they're not doing it themselves, they're not building the facility themselves, working with the co-manufacturer. Mm-hmm. Just timelines. How long should one expect for it to take from the time you've had your kitchen table idea for you to have a product that's ready to roll out of the production line?
Yeah, and there's multiple components in that. The first one is coming up with that proper agreement with your partner. And there are multiple things to take into account. Obviously, when you share it with a partner, you're slicing the bologna a little thinner, a little bit of cash goes to everybody. What are their responsibilities? Are they taking care of sales and distribution, and you just have the IP and you're doing production? Are they doing production? Is there a handoff period? So what is your sweet spot and what value do you add? And looking at you and your company, are you wonderful at production and you can handle that and you've got the people to do it, but your marketing side isn't as strong and you need to rely on them and their team to do it. So it's kind of finding the boundaries and who's responsible for what and making sure that's very clearly defined in a contract. The next component of that is simply looking at the state laws that you're going into. And if you're working with somebody else, legally, can you do that? Is there a royalty you're getting in? What is the max number on that? So there's a lot of, and also from a tax purpose, are you actually getting involved in the cannabis industry or are you licensing it out? Are you touching the plant? Are you not touching the plant? All these things that may impact your business from being a normal business to being a cannabis business, which are two different things. So as far as building that partnership, trust your partner, do your research on them up and down, look to see who's responsible for what, and then move forward from there. But it can take, a contract can easily take 3 months. Once you get that done, then you can really start rolling on the nuts and bolts of everything. And we've done this multiple times with our partners, and I've built out several facilities, and there are hiccups along the way. And what I love doing is designing a facility for somebody, have it really specced out, and have it delivered in one package so that you're there for 2 days installing all the equipment, as opposed to 2 weeks and running to your plumbing store or your brewery store to get everything dialed in. So making sure that's all set. And then typically when you're working with a partner, they've got internal resources that are QA, that are working with the state regulators, all that stuff to develop the label to make sure if you've got an existing label somewhere else, whether it's in California, but then you want to go into Michigan, you're going to have to modify it. Hopefully it's minor changes. And it's not just to the label itself and how it looks, but it's also to the packaging. Can it be clear on the bottom? Can it not be clear on the bottom? Do you need a child-resistant cap on it? Do you need the special logos on it? Does it need a dosing strip? Does it need the nutritional information? All these things can affect and change the timeline on that. So once you get that, the label dialed in and submitted, sometimes that can take 2 days to get reviewed by the state. Sometimes it takes 2 months. So from there, you've got your label finished, you've got your packaging delivered, you've got your emulsion that most likely will be made, if you're using SōRSE technology via a mobile system there. And then after that, you're bottling and packaging. So the short answer to your question is, it could easily be 6 months. If you have your act together and a partner who has their act together, it could be as short as 3 months. But there are always hiccups first time you do it. And sometimes it goes really easily and very smoothly. But I would say, if I were to give advice to people, hedge on the side of lighter volumes when you're first launching in a new state rather than larger volumes, just because of that unknown of, you could be great in one state, but it could be a totally different market in another one. And it's better to say, hey, you know what, we got a real problem. We got to get down there in 2 weeks to make more versus, man, we've got some product that's expired and we just lost some money.
So when we've talked about product strategy, one of the things that I've loved that you brought up is this idea of knowing your customer. Mm-hmm. And I'd love for you to pull that thread. We're seeing so much fragmentation in who wants what from their cannabis experience, whether it's on the high potency versus low potency. And I know you've worked with brands across that entire continuum. Talk a little bit about this imperative of knowing your customer and how that ends up manifesting the types of products that one would bring to market.
Sure, it's kind of knowing your customer, and the reality is we're such a new market with THC beverages. Sometimes the customers don't know they're your customers yet, and I don't know if that makes any sense or not. But in new and emerging markets where beverages simply don't exist or they're very rare, you really have to let people know that, hey, you're actually my customer. You can actually benefit from this. Here are the key reasons why this product is going to be great for you. And it is worth evaluating. It's worth evaluating and looking in the alcohol market, what it's doing in that state, in the standard beverage market, and then also THC to see what they're doing. High potency, low potency, where's it gonna go? And, honestly, if I had the answer to that, and I don't know if I think I do, but I'd like to think that, if we're looking at it as far as alcohol goes, and the THC beverage market is still trying to figure out what it is. We know what beer is. We know what whiskey is. We know what wine is. What is a THC beverage? Right now, it's anything you want it to be. It's a sparkling water infused with 2 milligrams. It's a sugar-based beverage with 100 milligrams. It's a small shot with 100 milligrams. It's, a mix of THC and CBD in a sparkling apple cider. So, and it may shake out and that may stay what it is. The THC is anything that you can infuse with THC. And, replacement for beer in a social beverage is absolutely one direction that it can go. But again, we run into this issue with these volumes that are a little more difficult to make money off of when you're selling, 50,000 cans a month versus Coca-Cola, who might be selling, of course, millions and millions of cans a month. So understanding your audience, understanding how you're going to convert your audience into saying, hey, this is a fantastic way to consume cannabis is also a big component of it.
I think that's such a critically important point. There's so much about the infused product space that the particularly the hardcore smoker as a customer base They don't know what they don't know. These products literally haven't existed. And so while we see phenomenal opportunity there, your point about the imperative of consumer education, I think is spot on. And it creates this interesting tension around the passion for the vision that you have versus the market's resonance with this idea that you have. And we've seen products that have struggled because folks are hell-bent on ramming through an idea that they have without really soliciting that feedback. Could you just talk a little bit about that feedback mechanism, how some of your clients have ensured that what they're bringing to market is positioned to be the most successful that it can be, using the feedback from the market as they're going through the development cycle?
Sure, and one example that I definitely have, I mean, that right now the top two by dollar amount selling beverages in the United States, one is called Major and one is called Can. And they're both very different products. One is a small microdose with a sparkling water, and that's Can. The other one is a high sugar, high milligram level, high use beverage. And they're both successful, which kind of really gives me a lot of hope for the industry in that it can go both ways and then somewhere in between. So they've had success, and but you're right, it does come down to education. We've got a lot of people who use our emulsion in these beverages. They have their own sales team, boots on the ground, educating the consumers. But of course, a big component of it is educating the bud tenders in the stores so that they understand what kind of clients they could springboard onto this. And that's one of the big things that we push is, the people that buy our beverages with SōRSE in them, they love them and they continue to buy them. We want to pull more people over. And who is that? Is that educating the high dose user, the recreational user, the weekend warrior, whatever it is? And it's finding that person and making it socially acceptable. And I think we've seen it a lot in the cannabis stores now. I mean, most of the people in here have walked into stores where you walk around, you're like, man, I could buy fine jewelry here. And this is a different level. This isn't what I expected at all. The first time, I think a lot of people remember the first time you walked into a cannabis store or the first time you walked into a premium store and you looked at it and you go, wow, this is a lot different than what I thought. I'm actually comfortable here. These people know what they're talking about. They're educated on it and they can help me out and give me the answers I need. So understanding their market, understanding the direction they're going, and kind of future casting it out, looking at other states. And Guy, I've got a schmancy beverage that's got a lot of organic material in it. It's got some cardamom and then some really unique flavors in here. Is that going to go over as well in Oklahoma as it is in Seattle? Maybe not. So taking that and then morphing your products as you expand across the country to meet with that demographic, I think is key. And we do have some clients that, maybe when they launch in Arizona, they're going to release a cactus cooler. And when they launch in Washington, it's going to be a Washington apple drink. And, anything else that's got these notable flavors to help connect your brand to the local people there, I think is definitely key.
One of my takeaways from that is this idea that even as there are, as this is a young and space and there's some really well-established kind of market leaders currently, huge space for innovation if you're building it right for the audience that you're trying to build for.
Yeah.
So you've repeatedly mentioned this idea of both suppliers and partners. And maybe first, just as you think about the supplies, the inputs into your manufacturing process, one of the questions we got from our audience in advance of this session was, do all raw materials need a COA, a certificate of analysis, or is industry not requiring that level of stringent testing and quality control?
Sure. The short answer is the majority of the industry does not require this. But like I said, run your business as if this was a real food business. If you don't have those resources internally, hire somebody on a contract basis to come in and say, hey, we're a cannabis company. We want to make a beverage. What do we need to do? And they will walk you through, and you may be overwhelmed with it at first, but it will save you, it could save you hundreds of thousands of dollars really sooner rather than later. If you have to do a recall, something like having a C of A and being able to track all your ingredients and having a recall plan. If you do have a recall plan and you've launched 50,000 bottles of something out there, but you know it's related to one ingredient and only went into 10 of it, if you can track those 10 and only pull those 10 rather than 50,000, that's huge, So managing it as if it was a food company is absolutely key. And C of A's, SOPs, all that stuff is all a strong component to a successful beverage. And yes, it is going to take absolutely more work in the beginning, but in the long run, it's going to pay itself back big time.
We call some of these things future-proofing your business.
It really is. It really is. And honestly, we've made those mistakes. We've seen our partners make those mistakes. And knock on wood, it's a real eye opener when you think you have your act together, but then you're like, wait a minute. And we'll do this. We'll do when our customers will do this, mock recalls all the time. And then all of a sudden that hole is exposed, and you're like, guy, I thought we had it buttoned up. But until you walk through that process, it's really difficult to do. And it's a matter of being able to say, hey, we can have all that information in 3 hours versus I think it's around here somewhere. Give me a couple of weeks. By that time, it is too late.
I'd love to pull that thread just a little bit, this idea of recalls and mock recalls. Talk us through that process. What are you preparing for there?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we have a full-time at SōRSE Technology, we have a full-time QA manager, and she is, it's everything. It's not just, I've got a bottle here of something, and we found out that there's the sugar in it was bad. That's relatively simple, but it's really going through with a mock recall is everything and knowing where all your ingredients went. So if I have 12 ingredients in a bottle of something and I can go back and I can say, all right, I'm going to look at this ingredient and be able to track it to every single bottle it's in, but then go backwards and look at my raw ingredients in my warehouse and say, based off of what I've ordered, based off of what I've used, I should have 48 pounds of that material sitting there. And when I look at it and I go, I only have 32 pounds. Where did this other material go? That is still a fail. It's not just that I couldn't recall it from there, but it's keeping track of all of your ingredients in your warehouse, knowing where they went. And when you're doing stuff in multiple states, it really compounds it because you're like, well, we'll just steal a couple bags of this and move it over there. Now, is somebody tracking that? And so there needs to be a software system in place there. And there's multiple of them out there to be able to do this. But it's not just what's in the bottle, but it's what's in your warehouse in your entire facility. And it's packaging and everything. Yep.
So if the concerns about recalls are perhaps more internal issues, talk a bit about supply chain disruptions. And one of our audience members had asked specifically about the pandemic and whether, given the shortage of cans that is impacting the canning industry, how should they be rethinking their can-based product strategy right now? And what are some of the other sort of supply chain disruptions that one is likely to encounter when you're dealing with infused products?
Sure. So I kind of like breaking it down into three different components. You've got the ingredients that go inside the bottle, your flavor, your color, your stabilizers, all that stuff. You've got your active material, your THC or your CBD, and then you've got all your packaging. And absolutely, the cannabis industry is crazy. You're doing business in multiple states. Each state is could be not as bad as doing it in a different country, but the regulations could be dramatically different, And so if your goal is to expand into multiple states, picking a form factor that can be used in multiple states with minimal changes is key, or at least a component of it. Be ready for it. So doing that, think, okay, I'm going to use a can. Can supplies, yes, absolutely are limited. Being able to source it domestically is very helpful, just because we've found that the volume of the labels that we've ordered, we could order 2 million of them from China, but with the changes that we make with our products, because the industry is changing so fast, And with the regulations changing so fast, and with states being totally different, it's not like I can use those 2 million labels for the next 5 years in all the states. It simply is not going to happen. So we're having to buy lower volumes from domestic suppliers, which I like. Price might be a little bit more, but you're typically getting a little bit more flexibility as far as changes and as far as lead time as well. So, with labels and packaging, and then with cans, yeah, it's difficult. Not all cans are created equal. Of course, you've got different sizes, you've got different liners. The question of scalping and how the absorption of THC or CBD happens inside that can liner is something that SōRSE Technology has looked into at length. But it's something that people need to be aware that it's not just, hey, I'll get a can and I'll put it in. I put 20 milligrams in. Man, I tested it. Something came back at 18. I don't like that. What did I do wrong? What did I do right? So, but we've seen big time delays just in general packaging as well, unrelated to the cannabis industry, with bottles, caps. So you really have to plan ahead. And when you talk about going back to that timeline of launching your product, a supplier could have your cans in stock 1 week and you say, great, we're ready to go. We're going to bottle in 3 weeks. And they're like, fantastic, we'll have those cans ready for you in 4 months. And that can be a real slowdown to what you're trying to do. The last part of that is supply chain with your active material. And this is your, say, for example, in the THC world, your THC distillate that you're going to be infusing. Making sure that product is quality material, making sure that the terpene profile matches what you're looking for. And then with SōRSE Technology, when we come and emulsify it, there's the timeline to emulsify it, and then of course the timeline to test it. Some states can do a turnaround in a day or two. Some states are weeks out now, and cost on that can also range dramatically as well. So those three components, it's a moving target to make sure that all of them line up and you can do it effectively.
So maybe a bit of an unfair question, and we've spoken a bit here about cans specifically, the shortages that are happening industry-wide for that. For somebody who's looking to start building a product right now, is this an acute enough issue that even if they may not be going live for another 3 to 6 months, that they maybe should be rethinking for a different packaging option? Or do you think this is just something that's based on where the economy is right now and will likely be resolved in the next few months?
Well, it's tough to say. The other component of that is, what is the capability of your production facility, whether it be your co-man, your partner you're using, or your facility yourself? Are you investing in a canning machine? Are you investing in a simple filling machine that can do glass bottles or PET or something? Pigeonholing yourself into something that is really specific might work out well, but it also limits your versatility. So that's kind of the other question to ask is, what are my capabilities? Do I have a filler that can do anything, but it takes more manual labor to get it done? Or is it something that is very specific, but I'm a slave to exactly, a slim can or something like that?
Really important considerations to think about. So maybe just to round out this piece about suppliers, I'd like for you to talk specifically about SōRSE here. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions we got was, is SōRSE a plant touching company? Do you actually own licenses in the markets that you operate? Or are you working with your partners as an ancillary service provider? Talk a bit about the business model sure. For those who may be engaging you in how you actually work.
Right. So if someone were to say, hey, give us a call up and say, I've got a beverage here. We've got the flavors dialed in. We know it's stable. We know it's going to go in a can or a bottle, whatever it is. We want to use SōRSE to infuse in our product. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll get, and I'm kind of starting a little further back, but we will get a sample of their product and uninfused and mess around with it in the CBD world to make sure the flavors are matching. There's no issues with that. And then launch it to, if we've got a partner where the law allows us to test it with THC, they can get a feel for that as well. A lot of times the laws don't, so we have to kind of understand that our emulsion is going to work in it. And then from there, we'll continue to build a relationship and say, okay, you can use SōRSE in your product now. With our partners, we can go out and do, say, a mobile run at your facility, and only the licensed people will be able to properly touch the plant. So someone would be paying SōRSE a kind of a royalty fee to be using the technology, and all the production of it would be done at a specific facility. We may ship the equipment out there and have have somebody who's appropriately licensed do it. But really, as SōRSE technology goes, we're not a THC company, as people might think. So not necessarily touching the plant when it comes to that. We rely on our partners for that. But it also gives us the ability to be very versatile with our partners. So say in California, you may be very easily able to buy our emulsified THC from one of our partners. You'll be able to get samples from that and be able to run with it, assuming that you have a license yourself. And like I said, with multiple other states where it's legal, we can have the equipment show up in a mobile unit and be able to emulsify, whatever it is, 1 kilo, 7 kilos, 12 kilos, to give them set up for as long as they need to get rocking and rolling.
So you began that example with somebody coming to you with a fully fledged business concept. They had the product dialed in. What if it's somebody who's early in the process? They don't have a license. They have an idea.
Right.
They've got a couple of ingredients that they think might work. Do you work with clients at that stage of development as well?
Absolutely, yeah. And we've developed, and we've got a full product development team here that can do as much or as little hand holding as needed to get their product to market. Obviously, there's a fee involved in it. It takes a fair bit of resources to go on, but we can help develop the product, get it to where they want it to be. And then depending on what state they want to launch in, honestly, I can't remember how many states we've produced our emulsion in. We've got enough contacts that we can say, hey, here are some resources you can use in California, Oregon, Washington, in Maine, wherever it is, to be able to successfully take that product from idea to getting a launch in the industry. And sometimes it's, hey, we don't know what market we want to launch in. Based off of what you see, what do you recommend, or where can we put our feelers out? So using us as a resource is also key, because the reality of it is, your product, we will design it so it works perfectly with SōRSE. And honestly, the more you sell, the more successful you are, the more successful we are in getting our product out there and being that key ingredient to all the edible and beverages out there. Yeah.
The Intel inside of the infused beverage world.
Exactly. We're like NutraSweet. We're like Intel. That's exactly what we want to be. We want people to look at that back of that can or that bottle, and hopefully you can see it here if I can figure it out, and see SōRSE there, and recognize that the dosing is going to be right, recognize that the flavor is going to be premium, recognize that the onset is going to be superior. And that's the difference that people are looking for, and where we found success.
So that's great. We've talked somewhat, or a little bit, about this idea of how the product concept decisions you make early can really impact the scalability of your product. I'd love to pull that thread a little and talk about how some of the design decisions will shape both your production process, how you go through your runs, and how you're able to scale, either how you're able to scale your manufacturing. So talk a bit about that, whether it's, the difference between working with cans versus glass bottles, or with different types of ingredients.
Yeah, God, there's several edges to that. The first one that popped into mind is simply the form factor of your product. The majority of the cannabis world out there is used to distributing smaller products, flour, vape cartridges, things like that. So when you show up and you say, hey, I've got a 16-ounce Monster Energy can size beverage that I want you to distribute, that's a big difference. It takes a different vehicle. Logistically, it's different. And so we've seen some customers kind of get caught off guard on that, because their resources for distribution are so different than what's out there now. You're limited on your resources. Also looking at simply the stores and how much space they have. the value of a beverage and the size of it takes up a much larger footprint than a lot of the other products out there. And we've all been to cannabis stores where it's a tiny little spot and real estate is a premium. So you've got to be able to justify that your big can or your champagne style bottle or whatever is worth it for this customer. And sometimes there's niche things that make it worthwhile. But that's kind of the first thing that came into mind. There's also the view of things in the market that you're launching in. Do people think that PET is good because I can recycle that plastic bottle and I feel great about it? Do they feel aluminum is better because I can recycle that? Is glass better because of that? Or is there a stigma towards one or the other? So those are all things that also take into account. If you're doing a low milligram beverage, a lot of times cans are great because you don't have to have them resealable. Anything bigger than that, it's 100 milligram. There are some people that absolutely do drink 100 milligrams in one shot, but the majority of people out there do dose it out. And if you can have a resealable cap that you can do that with that is child resistant, then it's fantastic. Honestly, I've got 2 kids myself. And I'd like to think that my kids are some of the best educated kids on cannabis in their school. And they look at it, what I do, as very similar to alcohol, drinking a beer versus drinking a cannabis beverage. And they know when to ask questions about things and they understand it. So it goes back to education. And do I keep my product sealed in the fridge with a child resistant cap? Absolutely. I trust my kids, but the last thing I want is an accident to happen. And if we can supply something that makes that a little more child proof until the education is out there, and it may morph, because honestly, a bottle of whiskey can sit in there and it's not child resistant, to get us to the point where people are comfortable with these products, I think is a big part of it.
And I think just seeing them more often as well. Most people will have seen a bottle of whiskey or a bottle of wine, and that almost creates, regardless of what brand it is,
sure,
identifiable. I think.
Don't get me wrong. I enjoy a good bottle every once in a while.
That's great. So we've talked a little bit about co-manufacturers, and I think there's a lot there, and particularly as it comes to trying to expand across state markets, and particularly given how young this industry is. What are some of the key questions you should be asking or thinking about as you're trying to identify who the right co-manufacturing partner is going to be to bring your product to market?
Sure. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is trust. Are they good people? Looking at their background. I mean, this might sound real creepy, but I like to do searches on these people. Are there lawsuits pending? What are their previous relationships with? Just vetting them from a business standpoint, as you would with any other partnership, is key. Also looking at how long they've been in the industry. What is their existing footprint? If you go into a state and they say, yeah, we've got 300 stores in this state, we just launched, we're in 20 of them. Okay, versus we've been established for 4 years, we're in 90% of the stores. All of a sudden, if you're partnering with them and they've got a sales team that already has those connections, you've honestly saved yourself a year's worth of building relationships there. So looking at their relationships, and then part of it is also, it kind of sounds stupid, but how excited are they to work with you? They might see it as, yeah, okay. Are you going to be that thing that's always second tier? Or are they so fired up and they see the value of what you're doing that they know they can make money off it, and they know that you can make money off it, and everybody can win? So looking at that and seeing how good of a partner they're going to be are making sure that it's financially viable for all involved. And honestly, a lot of the people that have used our products and launched in multiple states, they may have to morph their contract from state to state based off of who they're working with. They might find someone that's got, of those things I've listed, 3 out of the 4. And the one thing they need help with is that financial side of it. They've got the infrastructure built on a lot of other stuff. So, okay, so for a partnership, maybe we'll waive something else, but try to make it up on the back end so that we can get into that market sooner rather than later and be flexible with it. No market is the same as far as the relationship with the partner and also the legality of it and the industry. So I think you really have to be flexible and find a way to be successful. And ramping it up quickly, I think, is a big component of it too, especially when so many industries and states are relatively new to the beverage market. If you can be first, second, third, or fourth rather than 12th, I think that makes a big difference as well.
Especially when shelf space is in such short supply for these larger volume. So another part about the co-manufacturing piece of it, particularly given this is a very young market, there's a lot of folks who are just getting up and running. Talk about this idea of people who will have the capacity versus who are actually ready to go. The idea of in process versus not quite ready for market.
So really it lands on both sides of it, both on the people that are developing the beverages and the co-manufacturers. There are a lot of people out there with fantastic ideas and wonderful resources. And we've seen it multiple times where, hey, we're ready to go, we can do it. And you go and actually look at their facility and they're like, yep, we're ready to go and ready to do it. As soon as we cut a floor drain in, as soon as we do a small build out here. And I think a lot of us has dealt with build outs and infrastructures, and that, I can tell you some cities, yeah, that build out might take 2 months. Some cities, because of contractor delays or permits, that could be a year. And so understanding what somebody means by we're ready can be a pretty broad range. And then the same thing on the other side, someone can say, hey, we've got a beverage, we are ready to go. And then that co-man turns around to you and say, all right, just send me over the SOP of exactly how you want me to produce this beverage. And they go, oh, we really don't have that yet. Not to say they can't put it together in a few weeks, but it's the questions that you don't know that come and catch you off guard. So there's a range of people out there and a range of capabilities, and it all depends on what your timeline is, how much money you can throw at it, and who you trust.
So for somebody who might be new to this, if you're walking through your deeper negotiations with potential partner or co-manufacturer, they've invited you to see the facility for the first time, what are some of the things you should be looking for that could be potential warning red flags or be setting off alarm bells? Yeah,
again, this goes back to the QA, if you first time you go there and say, great, I'd love to sit down with your QA manager. And they go, well, we kind of got Ed taking care of that stuff. He was pretty good when he worked at the McDonald's and cleaned everything up there. Okay, and he might be doing the best that he can, but is he that right resource? Just walking around, and honestly, in my previous career, I've been in enough food processing facilities and manufacturing warehouses to be able to walk in and you can say pretty quickly, okay, this place is in disarray, but they have their act together. Or this place is in disarray, but they definitely don't have their act together. Is it in disarray because they're busting at the seams, they don't have space, or because they lack the attention to detail to say, guy, if I have to have a recall, I don't think, I see multiple brands mixed together. I see multiple ingredients mixed together. I can walk up to their cooler, their walk-in cooler, and I don't see a list there with a sign-off sheet where somebody's checked the temperature every day for the last 6 months. It's those little attention to details that are going to kind of bite you in the ass 6 months from now that you should really look for. And having even a general QA checklist or GMP status of a checklist, you can walk in and say, guy, are these walls washed down? Do they have the proper storage? Is there a quarantine area if something needs to be put on hold? Are things labeled appropriately? Have things been moved to other containers? All these little things that just because they're, it might be worth asking a question on that. And if they don't have an answer to it, then reevaluate perhaps.
So we've been circling around this idea of SOPs, and I think it is worth just dwelling on that a little bit more. It's obviously an issue that you're quite passionate about. I think we've touched on it a bit on the co-manufacturing side, but talk about it a bit on the product, on the producer side itself, like inside the company that's making the infused product. How should you be thinking about SOPs, and really what are some of the kind of absolutely mission critical aspects of both SOP and QA and quality assurance that you have to make sure you've dialed in?
Well, a big thing is food safety, obviously, and making sure that you're never going to release a product that's going to harm anybody. And anybody with a strong food background would be able to help you out on exactly what you need on that. And it could be, and it's everything from how the bottles are stored to how they're sanitized, to how the caps are sanitized, to your cleaning process of your tanks, to the water tested going into it. Every component of it needs to have an answer on why it's done and how it's tested. The other thing is your active material, how it's infused in the product, how it's dosed, how it's tested. And with SōRSE, we definitely work with you to make sure that you're dosing it appropriately in the right way. It's mixed in appropriately before it's filled in the bottles. And then not only that, but when it's sent out for, so say for example, you're mixing up a 20-barrel tank of a beverage, and SōRSE is batch dosed. The SōRSE THC emulsion is batch dosed into the tank. A lot of times a facility will do kind of a pre-test. We've dosed it appropriately. We know exactly what it should be. They'll fill a bottle with it, and either internally or externally, they'll have it tested for potency. And if they're looking for a 100 milligram drink and it comes out at 98% or 98% active or 98 milligrams in that, that's usually pretty good for what they want within the standard range of active material. From there, if it needs to be adjusted, it can either be tested again or dosed with more or watered down, whatever it is, to get that exact dosing properly. And then from there, the bottles can be filled. Once those bottles are filled, you're pretty much invested in it and there's no turning around. So doing a sensory test on it is also key. A lot of times there's rules and regulations that need to be touched on that, but that's definitely a key component before you start filling things as well.
What do you mean by sensory test?
Sensory test, what does it taste like? Did it get through all the SOPs, but there was too much citric acid put into it? And, somebody accidentally doubled it. And so testing the non-infused product specifically can give you an idea. And this is something that, I think a lot of third-party co-mans really need to be trained on. And SōRSE Technology has gone through a full testing series of sensory testing for flavor and what to note. And having a standard setup saying, okay, this is what it should taste like. Maybe, you've got a bulk taste of non-infused product, and then they're tasting that non-infused product again and saying, yep, these both align. Great, infuse it and let's run with it. Because once a mistake is made, it's very difficult to make those changes, and you're pretty much dumping a batch. And dumping a batch of, say, sugar water with flavor in it, that could make 15,000 bottles versus dumping a batch of THC infused liquid is, could be the difference between $500 and $15,000.
You began this conversation by saying, treat this like the food industry would. And any great chef will say, you never send food out without tasting it first. So I think a really important point there.
Yep, absolutely.
So let's talk about navigating regulations. The cannabis industry is laden with regulations, and then the infused product categories have their own regulations on top of that. Maybe a couple of themes here to explore. One, what are some of the critical regulations that, as a infused product manufacturer, you have to be aware of beyond, the dosing piece of it? What are some of the things that you've got to understand that are consistent across all markets?
Sure, consistent across all markets. Nothing. And I guess that's part of what makes it very unique and challenging. You said besides dosing, but dosing, I'm going to throw it out there anyways, just because you need to know what your state regulation is. If you're looking to make a 100 milligram beverage and you say it's 100 milligrams, does that mean it can be 100 milligrams plus or minus 5%, 10%? Does that mean it can never go over 100 milligrams? All these things are key components of it. Other regulation things that we've ran into are, child resistant, of course. Some states have exit packaging they can put it in, and after that, it doesn't matter. Some states' beverages need to be continuously child resistant if it's over a certain milligram level. So that's a big component of it, and understanding that. labels the dosing of it. Some states say if it's got the verbiage where it says 1 ounce equals 10 milligrams of this beverage, you're good to go. Some of them require dosing strips to be on the side where it's like a clear ladder that you can dose it from. Some require a dosing cap, or you can use a dosing cap for that goes along with it. And each one of these it's an evaluation of what does the market want, and also cost-wise. Every time you add something to it, it can also add costs. You know, a little dosing cup might only cost a few cents, but boy, it doesn't work with the bottling system to automatically put it on. So now I manually have to do it. So that 3-cent dosing cup all of a sudden turned into a 12-cent dosing cup. So, you know, as far as regulations and packaging, there's, you know, we used to, when we were developing products early on, we'd work with our marketing department, and they'd come up with fantastic ideas, beautiful looking products. And from an operations side, I'm looking at, okay, what can I do to make this? How efficiently can I make this from a cost standpoint, from a labor standpoint? And so a lot of times, and then at the end of the day, you know, great, we've created this beautiful champagne style bottle. It's going to be in a wonderful box. It's going to have a dosing cup that's a champagne glass. It's going to have a neck dipped in wax. There's going to be 3 labels on it. And I look at it and I'm thinking, I can't, from a regulatory standpoint, boy, we've met everything, but I can't sell this because this is going to be $100 product by the time I'm done. So, you know, it's finding that proper balance and seeing what the market wants, and then seeing what the regulations will allow. And because it is a young industry, there is still a lot of back and forth with regards to what is accepted. And we've had clients that have submitted labels that have gotten rejected because they're too bright. They dull it down a little bit and then it's accepted. You know, it's nothing that's spelled out in the regulations, but sometimes it's a back and forth that comes into it to find out exactly what they mean by does not appeal to children, something like that, for example.
So that's great. Another part of the regulatory morass that operators are dealing with is the delta between CBD and THC regulations. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we know folks who are either thinking about manufacturing CBD products or THC products, and sometimes both manufacturing both types of products. What are some of the key considerations there, particularly if as you're exploring a multi-state strategy with each of these cannabinoids?
Yeah, it's complicated. You know, THC is definitely something that, you know, you're state specific, multi-state wise. You know, we talked about partners a little bit there. It's great to have a partner that is in multiple states, so you're not having to reinvent the wheel every single time. CBD, when it's hemp derived, you know, again, check your local state regulations. But you know, most of that can be shipped across states. So with SōRSE technology, I mean, it's almost as simple as, hey, we've got product, we'd like to infuse it with hemp derived CBD. We need 3 kilos of that converted? Could be something we have in stock, and it's out the door in a week. You know, if it's cannabis derived CBD like they do in California, it's a different story. Obviously, you got to go through a very similar process that we do with the THC side of that. So it can be a challenge. We have answers to everything to make it happen, I guess. But it's sometimes not as easy as just picking up the phone and ordering it. Sometimes it is. And a lot of times we're dealing with people that are in startups and I go back to the volumes and working with co-mans, especially in the CBD world, and trying to get line time on a bottling line and specifics that they're requesting from our emulsion. So timelines can sometimes be extremely tight when we've got a product that needs to get out at a certain time, needs to be at the co-man at a certain time, it needs to be infused a certain way. And we can handhold all the way through that, but it definitely takes a high attention to detail.
Just one point there that you made that I think is so important, that even if you're in the CBD space, you've got to know where your CBD is coming from, because the rules governing marijuana-derived CBD versus hemp-derived CBD are foundationally different.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do a good job at making sure that our customers fully understand where that ingredient comes from. If we make any changes to any of our raw ingredients, let them know, because we know it affects their packaging. Again, operating like a food company, so that if we change one little thing in our emulsion recipe, that, obviously if it's an allergen or something big like that, but even modifying something that could affect your label or how it responds with something else you're putting into that package, definitely making the customer aware of that for sure. Yep.
You said at the outset that you work with clients internationally, and I'm curious about kind of the logistics that, states end up almost being like mini countries. What changes when you're now doing this on an international basis, and maybe thinking specifically of the CBD example? Are you shipping CBD out from here? Or are you sourcing it locally in your destination market? What does that process look like?
So currently, when it's legal in the countries it's legal to, we ship out CBD from here. Logistically, absolutely. It can be a process of not only the country it's going into, but the shipping carrier that you use. Do they fully understand what the product is, and are they on board with that? And that takes, we've found that is much more of a real conversation with those people that ship internationally, as a business. Say, hey, here's what we're doing. We want our customer to get this without an issue. And sometimes the customer is ordering it and they're having it's shipping to this customer at a co-man location in another country. And when that shows up with all the international documents, and they go, wait a minute, it's shipping to company X, but it's sold to company Z, and your company Y, but it's actually produced by company Z or L. How does all this work? And so having somebody that really knows international shipping to make that process be a 2-day process, again, versus honestly a 3-month process, or having that product returned back to you. Meanwhile, you've got a customer that's trying to produce, just waiting for your product there, not making any money. So talk to the professionals is the best answer I can give on that one.
I just heard of somebody who had a container of CBD intercepted in Dubai because they picked the wrong shipping partner.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's been a lot of buzz around Delta 8 over the past 6-8 months when it's really captured the public zeitgeist. I'm curious whether that's bled into the infused product space, whether you're seeing companies now looking at D8 as an additional cannabinoid to infuse in their products, and whether the process of working with D8 is different from, say, THC or CBD.
Yeah, the Delta 8 and Delta 9, those are definitely, we have seen some product out there that has come from non-THC derived material. This is a big thing that is, I want to say, evolving daily. And that would be, I'm going to say, we like to keep that an arm's length away, in that there's so much of a gray area right now, and it's a gray area for some states and it's a black and white area for other states. So that is one I'm going to say, check your state regulations, see what they're saying about it, and see what they forecast on that, on what it's going to be. So I'm going to, not that I'm not going to answer that question, but honestly, this it could change 2 weeks from now for somebody if I gave some information on that. So it's ask the real questions, talk to your state representatives or your cannabis department in your state, and see where they land on it. And it's definitely a gray area, and definitely something that can possibly get you in trouble if you're not doing it.
It's one of the many areas in the space where having good counsel and somebody who really understands the regulations of each market that you're trying to operate in.
Absolutely. And even in Washington State, we have some clients that, their regulatory person will say, hey, Delta 9's been a big thing here. We can't have that in any of our product, asking for additional documentation from who you're getting the raw material from to confirm that the product you're getting is actually the product you think you're getting.
So this has been a phenomenally kind of wide-ranging conversation, but I'd like to close on this theme of the future of infused products. And maybe first, what are some of the key trends that you're watching in this space that stakeholders should be aware of?
Key trends are there. It's with beverages, it just keeps expanding. I mean, we're seeing low milligram grow, but we're also seeing high milligram grow. For a while, several of our partners kind of launched that mid-range, that 50, 30 milligrams. That hasn't seemed to be taking off quite as much. Maybe in the right market it would, with the right presentation. So it's so dependent on the market and understanding that. If you want to launch in Ohio with a Buckeye flavor something, but I think the sheer growth of beverages and the trend to try to ride that wave, it looks very appealing, but I can tell you from experience, like I said, we've had failures as much as successes. And luckily right now, the successes are outweighing the failures. But you've got to be very wary and be very diligent of what you're doing to make sure you're successful. As far as trends, like I said, it goes back to the market. And something like Washington State, you're seeing a big growth in beverages, just even in the last 8 months, where it's even more an established industry and is continuing to grow. A lot of high milligram stuff. California, you're seeing a lot of low milligram stuff really take off. High milligram is still doing well, but I think it's just a different, and even Northern California versus Southern California are different. So, if I knew exactly what all the trends were, I might be in a different spot. But I think making yourself aware, making people aware, and educating is definitely a key component to driving the success of your product.
So about 6 weeks ago, we saw the introduction of what is probably the most robust proposal to legalize cannabis federally in the Senate. And while there's a lot of discussion and debate about the viability of that bill, kind of what is your outlook for federal legalization and the potential impact that would have on the space?
Yeah, I do believe it's not an if, but a when. It will happen. I think as people continue to expand to other markets, yes, it's wonderful to get their footprint into multiple markets, but you're also saying, okay, when this switch flips, how are we going to pivot? How are we going to be successful? How are we going to consolidate? And there is going to be a big lag time. It's not going to be, hey, you know what? It's nationally legal, have fun. The logistics of it, the transport of it, the distribution of it are going to take some time to really get dialed in. So, I'm excited about it. I look at our partners and how they expand and the footprint that SōRSE has grown throughout the country, and it's very exciting. And, for those out there that are looking to get into those markets, we are definitely a source that can help you, no pun intended, that can help you get into those markets and be very successful. And sometimes it's baby steps. And if you have the financial capital behind it, you're willing to take a risk, sometimes those steps can be pretty aggressive. And it's fun to watch. It really is.
Amen to that.
Great.
Tyler Peterson, Chief Operating Officer of SōRSE Technology. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you for sharing your perspective. To your point, there's so much excitement in this. There's so much energy in this space that it's impossible not to be excited about it. And maybe I will ask you that point specifically. Is there one thing that you are most excited about as you look out to the future of infused beverages?
Yeah, it's really the expansion and the how easy it is to recognize these brands out here now. I could be wearing a shirt from one of the brands that uses SōRSE, and I'll get someone recognizing it. And you go, wait a minute, this is becoming more than just a bunch of hippies smoking pot. This is mainstream. This is as recognizable as a Sierra Nevada beer. This is getting there. And that's what I'm excited about, that the stigmas are changed, the openness have changed, and the conversations have changed so that it becomes part of our real life. And honestly, I'm excited that, and I'll share this one little last story. Yes, we do sell cannabis products, so people use cannabis products and they use it for recreational uses. But the number of stories that people have come up to me at trade show and say, your technology, your emulsion in this product has changed my life. My grandfather, for the first time in 20 years, has been without pain because of this. Your topical product because of what it has done, has saved my relationship, or whatever it is. And those little instances, is also something I get really excited about on, how we're changing the world for not just consumable edibles, but just people's lives. And that's a really neat thing.
It comes down to people. They're what is making all of this possible, and brings us full circle to this idea of knowing your customer. I think starting there, paying attention to the processes, understanding deeply the regulations, and being strategic in the approach to market, I think is kind of the foundation of being successful in this space at a time that there's phenomenal opportunity in the road ahead.
Yep, great.
Well, we could keep going forever, but I know we're at time. So for our audience, thank you for joining us for this conversation. If you haven't already done so, please access the reports that we have co-produced with SōRSE at efrontieردata.com/reports. If you have questions for Tyler, for the SōRSE team, or for the New Frontier Data team, please punch them into the audience Q&A field within your interface there on screen. We will absolutely get back to you. And if you want to contact us, got a contact information up on screen. But as moderator of this conversation, as Chief Knowledge Officer of New Frontier Data, and on behalf of the New Frontier Data team, I'd like to thank Tyler and the team over at SōRSE for being such incredible partners through this series of webinars and webcasts. I think the quality of insights that you have presented, the depth of knowledge and expertise that you and your team have shared is truly par excellence. And we hear it perennially from our audiences how much they've appreciated these conversations. So Tyler, thank you very, very much to you for this great conversation, to your team for the phenomenal collaboration. It has been an absolute pleasure.
No, it's been a pleasure on our side as well. Thank you very much. Yep.
So with that, thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you very soon at our next webinar. And until then, please do take care of yourselves and each other, and continue to explore the phenomenal opportunities that lie ahead as the cannabis industry grows, evolves, and presents a generational opportunity for both wealth creation and social change. It is an unprecedented time in this industry, and while it is a complex market, I hope these conversations are helping you better understand how to navigate this industry at this critical time. Thank you. Take care.